houses on the moon.
The highest GDP per capita in the Milky Way.
Small modular reactors under every village green.
This is Anglo-futurism.
We'll start the episode in a moment, but first, some introductions. I'm Tomo.
And I'm Calum Drysdale.
And we are broadcasting to you live from beneath the famous thatched roof of the King Charles III space station.
In each episode, we will beam up a distinguished guest with an idea that will help rouse Britain from her slumber and send her on her way to galactic prosperity. And with that, on with the show.
Ever since King Alfred founded this podcast in the year 886, it's been about one thing and one thing only, making this country the greatest in the galaxy.
Ambitious goals call for ambitious measures, and our guest today has just such an idea.
He's the man with a plan to put the land into outlandish.
A terraforming titan, the nemesis of Neptune.
Some call him the economist who wants to turn the North Sea into Britain's back garden.
Others call him the Duke of Dogger Bank.
Meet Duncan McClements, who's calling for a new Britlantis.
Duncan, welcome to the King Charles III space station.
Hello.
Duncan, you're a research associate at the Adam Smith Institute. You've helped write a textbook on development economics. You're an Emergent Ventures winner, and you've just put out a blog post co-authored with Jason Hausenloy, in which you've made what you call an outlandish proposal to solve the housing crisis. Tell us more.
So the UK is a housing crisis, as you're no doubt aware. Houses were last so expensive versus incomes in the 1870s. These rents in London are half of Londoners' average post-tax income, and the average British home is smaller than New York. And we know that this is due to objections to construction, and namely the individuals dislike the general inconveniences that construction tends to bring with the area. Now, we had another problem, namely energy generation, where we had the ability to build cheaply on land with onshore wind farms, but we soon found there was quite vigorous local opposition to them spoiling views and so forth. And so how did we deal with this? Well, we went into the North Sea, 100 kilometres off Britain's coast, and we built a large number of wind turbines there instead. So why don't we solve another problem by building in the North Sea as well?
And you're not proposing having floating terraced houses in the North Sea, are you?
No, so I'm proposing reclaiming Dogger Bank. This was inhabited by humans some 7,000 years ago before a particularly large Norwegian landslide, and we can have it back. Dogger Bank is only 15 to 40 metres below sea level and is 17,600 kilometres squared across, the size of Wales. This is at depths we've built projects before.
So, Duncan, what you're saying is that the housing crisis is so bad that we should go to the North Sea, where there is easily reclaimable land, and we should build a huge island on that.
Yes, specifically, I claim that the cost-benefit ratio is very conservative, on a very conservative assumptions, 6.2. And if you believe that the new city would be anything like as productive as London, you can get cost-benefit ratios in the dozens or even in the hundreds.
Well, the next question is obvious. How do you build a huge island out of the sea?
Yes, so there's three key steps to the process. The first step is that we just need to build a series of dams around Dogger Bank itself. This is a perimeter of about 720 kilometres. We then need to...
Negligible.
This is, the largest projects before are less than 2 orders of magnitude smaller than this kind of thing. After that, you then just need to pump all of the water out, and you'll need to do a bit more than you think because of the issue of backflow, the ground is leaky, etc. And then you just need to put enough material into your island, and then you have a functioning island.
And what material is this?
So this is varied in previous projects. One of the reasons why previous projects were so expensive was because they entirely used sand. But because we're building at much greater heights, we would probably end up using crushed granite or limestone or something similar.
Well, you wouldn't build a castle on sand. That would be foolish.
That would be a ridiculous idea. And that, I imagine that is quite a lot of land that we would need. Where on earth are we going to get so much material?
Yes, so specifically, I calculate you probably need about 2 gigatons of rock in the worst case. This is, throughout, I assume that Dogger Bank is only 40 metres. It is 40 metres to simulate worst possible case. Regarding where you could get this, ideally you want to go as close as possible to Eastern England on the basis that this will minimise the costs of transporting the material by truck, which is about 3 to 4 times as expensive as transporting it by ship per unit distance.
So, goodbye, Kent.
Potentially.
Duncan, you've talked to us about the arrival of the concrete blocks, and you've given us the impression that the rest of the process will be pretty easy.
Well, once we've got thousands of blocks dropped, the rest of it is trivial.
And Calum and I are very happy to take your word for this and put you in charge, but perhaps some listeners, including the Prime Minister, might like to know a bit more before they sign off on this.
Yes. So regarding costings, I find that the concrete blocks are almost everything. There's some it's 74 billion of the 97 billion cost I total estimate. And so why is this? Well, it's that the other steps of the process just involve pumping water out, which even if you assume no economies of scale, you can just take from existing commercial pumps. And so they're only active for 100 days. You need about 7 million of them. And then this will, and then you can sell them afterwards. And so the cost of 12 billion that I estimate is very, very pessimistic here.
So did you say you can sell them?
Well, you should be able to sell them once you've used them.
Who's buying them?
I like the idea. I like the idea here that we actually we did a mass call up and say Britain needs your swimming pool pumps, or and organise a mass donation of pumps that can be used to expand our territorial heft.
Yeah, so I mean, there are many industrial uses in the world which require pumps, and so we can just sell those after. You probably do burn some of the value here, but it will still cost less than I estimate.
Second-hand, 7 million pumps, slightly used.
The other portion of the cost, of course, is the cost of the land itself. The good news is that mining generally is fairly cheap, at only about $5 per ton. And much of that figure is processing on the fact that you're digging underground rather than just being able to dynamite the surface.
Well, I was going to say, actually, given that you say that it would be best to do it in Kent, but Kent is quite occupied. Surely there are less occupied, less inhabited areas of Britain.
Kent has the hardiest NIMBYs in the world.
No, exactly. It strikes me that we could look elsewhere and get this on the cheap.
So Britain's largest borough is Powys, which is also a region which is about a third of the size of Wales and has enormous and is very much highlands, which you could take 40 metres off and it would still remain vastly above sea level.
So what you're proposing, Duncan, here is to convert the Welsh valleys into the Welsh flats.
The Welsh steppes.
Source of the new Welsh golden horde that comes pouring over after the Welsh nomads discover the power of the recurve horn bow.
Well, it's a good thing we've got that line of castles.
No,
there.
exactly. Offa really was looking to the future
when he was playing the long game.
He was playing the really long game. The 2021 is Welsh invasion.
Perished in the Stålhagen slip when we lost Dogger Bank.
And I imagine the other countries around the North Sea might have something to say about us expanding our territorial heft.
So the good news is that some 95% of Dogger Bank is within Britain's exclusive economic zone.
What about the other 5%, Duncan?
This may pose greater problems. I will. All of my benefit estimates don't change much at all if you only lose 5% of it.
But whose turf are we encroaching on?
Oh, Germany's.
I don't think that should be a problem.
No, I don't think that should be a problem at all. That should be a problem at all. And although this does raise the question, if we did expand our great island to become the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Northern Ireland, and Dogger Bank, would this increase our exclusive economic zone? Would we steal fishing rights from the Germans and the French and the Dutch?
The legality of this is, I think, somewhat uncertain, mainly because no project of this size has ever been completed before in terms of land reclamation. But of much more importance, were it to be the case, would be the acquisition of Norwegian oil rights.
Right. Okay. And people have talked about these projects before, haven't they? So there's been some talk even of enclosing the whole of the North Sea. Why is this a more sensible plan?
So previously, primarily for reasons of combating climate change in Northern Europe, there's been proposals to build the North European Enclosure Dam, or NEED. This would involve placing dams around the gap between Scotland and Norway and between in the tail end of the English Channel. This has a couple of problems. So firstly, there's the issue of the boat lift, of keeping the world's busiest shipping lanes open. And secondly, and more importantly, this is a project of vastly greater engineering complexity because you have to build, amongst other things, in the 300-metre deep Norwegian trench.
Right. Okay.
And the cost the cost per unit height will, because we're dealing with a volume here, that will actually grow directly proportion. That will grow as the square of the distance you're using here.
Just for reference, 300 meters is the height of the Shard.
Yes, and so like building a wall that tall kind of thing is like vastly more difficult than building a wall of height 40 meters.
Tom falling back on his old journalistic units of measurement.
Well, it's actually 309 meters, but I didn't want to bring down the tone.
Yeah, actually, we should. Tom, what you missed the opportunity to ask was how many Olympic-sized swimming pools we would have to pump out of the reclaimed Doggerland.
Well, one key journalistic unit for size is how many units of the country of Wales is it? But we have a very neat answer for that, Duncan. How many units of Wales is your conception of Doggerland?
Oh, so my conception of Dogger Bank is 1 unit of Wales.
I want to ask about this point about environmental objections. Is there not a risk that we might have North Sea NIMBYs who might spoil our fun and tell us that this can't go ahead?
We might be spooking the seahorses.
Yeah, exactly. Or the seals.
Tom, just for the listeners who don't already know, what is a NIMBY?
NIMBY stands for Not in My Backyard, and someone who is a NIMBY objects to developments in their area. And there might be housing, it might be a train line, it might be a power station, and these people don't want Britain to be unable to build, but they are acting within their self-interest in a system that allows them to block stuff local to them.
Because they worry that it'll lower their housing prices, don't they?
I think that can be one of the worries. People also don't like the hullabaloo that comes with big building projects. There are various reasons, essentially, why someone might stand in the way of these things without objecting to them in principle.
And where might one find a NIMBY, Tom?
They are all around us, Calum. They are everywhere where houses are too expensive. They are everywhere where energy is, I think, the 4th most expensive in the world. In short, they are all over Britain, but particularly in the southeast.
And this is a uniquely British problem, isn't it?
I think the cost of our energy relative to other countries, and the cost of our housing, and the cost of building railway lines per kilometre, all point to the fact that the British NIMBY is among the hardiest of its species. It's a species that was hunted almost to extinction by the Victorians, who were very, very good at building stuff. But in the modern era, we've let them run amok.
And this is nothing to do, Tom, is it, with the Town and Country Planning Act?
It has everything to do with the Town and Country Planning Act, but we can come to that in another episode.
So get that in your diaries, everyone.
So, I mean, it's possible historically there is definitely a record of protests here with Greenpeace briefly occupying the global state of Waveland and on the island of Rockall for 2 years from 1997 to 1999.
For listeners, where is that?
About 200 miles off the coast of Scotland to the west.
Right.
It's the good news, though, is that in general, the ocean has about 200 times less biomass per unit area than the land does. So the genuine environmental harm of this should be much lower than any comparable proposal to build on land.
That seems as good a point as any to go to a commercial break, but we'll be right back after a brief word from our commercial partners.
Are you preparing your thatched space station for Andromeda in bloom? Or does your roofing simply need a sprucing? Then look up interstellar thatching services on the Berners-Lee Hypernet, or drop into our workshop in the Outer Hebrides.
Welcome back to the King Charles III space station, where Tom and I are nice and warm and dry. Thanks.
Protected from the elements of space. And if you'd like to use our discount code while shopping for Space Thatch, then it is AFPOD10. That's AFPOD10.
And you would get a free quotation and 10% off.
Marvellous. So we've raised Dogger Bank from the seabed. We've built this island the size of Wales. We've looted the Welsh valleys of granite en route to doing that. And it sounds pretty good to us.
Yeah. I mean, I'm totally sold. I'm totally sold.
And by the way, what do you want to do with this island?
Given that the penny pinchers and the bean counters in the treasury might object to us spending such a vast sum.
Yes. So the key advantage is that in the UK, I estimate that houses are between 50% and 3 times more expensive than their cost of construction in London, and around two times as expensive as they need to be in the rest of the country. And so this suggests that you would be able to considerably reduce rents if you were able to build a new city without people objecting to planning permission. Specifically, I use pre-existing land values and instead assume that you can build up to 8 stories tall, and that you have somewhat reduced garden space, because we currently use 5 times as much land for gardens as residential construction generally. And even in London, more space is used for gardens than residential housing in 28 out of the 33 London boroughs.
So are you envisaging this being much like London today? Is it going to be another city with all kind of activity that takes place within a city?
Yes. There's some manufacturing benefits we might be able to get onto later, but generally speaking, even if you just replicate London, which is what I assume in the economic modelling of this, is if you replicate a mid-sized UK city like Cambridge or Oxford, you would get benefits of about 622 billion and a cost-benefit ratio of a factor of 6.4 or so. If you replicate London, you can get cost-benefit ratios in the hundreds or more.
This is a big if, right? Because there's a lot of London that is difficult to replicate. You'd have to get all of your bright young things and get them willing to ship off into the middle of the North Sea. What are you doing on Dogger Bank that makes it attractive and gets people there?
Yeah, so there's 2 answers here. The first answer is that Dogger Bank will be a UK city, and UK economy is primarily services based, and as far as this is concerned, all that you need is just sufficient numbers of bright people. There's very minimal capital startup costs. So one thing which I think is particularly promising for any reclaim land to differ for the UK on is that the primary constraint on UK electricity prices is also the planning system. So although we have partially circumvented the issues with planning by building offshore, this does result in the energy costing 3 times as much as it needs to, and it takes 15 years to connect to the grid on average, with the current system.
A field that the French are defeating us in soundly.
Well, I mean, we're currently at the point where we're importing large quantities of French electricity.
That's why I no longer use my toaster.
Because we're unwilling to build nuclear power plants here, so we just build nuclear power plants 200 kilometers away, and this is somehow different from an environmentalist perspective.
So Dogger Bank will be dotted with small modular reactors
Yes.
among the streets of Georgian homes. Calum, for the benefit of our listeners, what is a small modular reactor?
Yeah, so a small modular reactor is a type of nuclear reactor that is, as the name suggests, a lot smaller. And what makes it special is that it can be built in factories. So a big problem with large reactors is that they need a lot of custom welding, which is very expensive. But these can be built in parts in factories and then assembled on site. And because they're a lot smaller, they don't need large cooling chimneys, which makes them far less of a visual presence on the landscape.
You should expect the price of electricity on this island to be much lower than the mainland if you have free construction of the necessary infrastructure, for a variety of reasons. So, most of the cost of nuclear power plants, for example, is financing costs, or that's driven by the extremely long time of construction. And so, if you're able to build especially small modular reactors more quickly, you could reduce this considerably. It takes 15 years to connect to the grid on average.
So you're proposing making this not just a new city, but a nuclear powered city.
Yes, although it's important to know that all of these, none of this is factored into the cost-benefit analysis. If you believe any of this is possible at all, this will only make you want to do this more based on the conservative baseline of calculation.
And it'll have a beautiful design code as well, we assume, to attract people there. 6-story Georgian townhouses, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Exclusively.
So far, we've been talking about Dogger Bank as a place that's going to have a big service economy.
Yeah, I mean, you're imagining, right, that half of Clapham and Dalston heads off to go and seek their fortunes, aren't you?
The windmill will be empty. The cream of Hinge will have vanished from South London.
Well, no, it does. It raises this point, right, that if you are on Hinge, you'll have to set your radius out to 200 miles so you can access the Doggerland hotties.
Is this what we're going to do with Dogger Bank? Or is there more that can be achieved?
So the other key possibility here is that one major factor behind the decline of UK industry is that UK electricity prices have increased by a factor of 3 in nominal terms or 2 in real terms since 2008 alone. And this is in large part due to the kinds of planning obstacles we mentioned earlier. So sure, it's the case that we are still able to get energy by building offshore wind farms, but they do cost 3 times as much as onshore wind farms would. And nuclear power plants take an enormous length of time to build, in part for environmental review reasons, and 80% of their cost is interest associated with the length of construction and various other capital costs. And so it would be possible to potentially imagine that that Dogger Bank would actually be able to restart the flames of industry as electricity prices would finally make us more than competitive with the continent and able to support a high-tech manufacturing sector.
So what you're saying is that actually it's these NIMBYs as well who are contributing to the high prices of electricity.
Yes, and the demise of UK industry here.
Demise of UK industry. And so this is something that we could potentially reverse. We could have cloth-capped men going to light industrial factories in Doggerland.
Well, it's the case that Germany has shown that it is viable to have a high-tech, high-income manufacturing-based economy, and it's clearly not impossible for developed countries to have this. So one particularly notable potential industry here is, in order to prevent climate change, we're moving towards electrifying all industries, particularly steel. And so you could have steel, electric-fired arc furnaces, which would allow us to recycle large amounts of steel and restart the steel industry.
Oh, I think we can think of a lot of uses for that.
No, absolutely right. We cannot let the flames of British industry die. That actually, if we are competitive, we could have. I mean, the mind boggles, right? The pewter tankard factories of Dogger Bank running 24/7.
The amount of spaceships with mullioned windows that we could be sending soaring into space alongside this beautiful King Charles space station in which we are recording.
The case is becoming increasingly obvious. So in your models, Duncan, you've assumed that our beautiful new city on Doggerland,
Dogger Bank. So,
what's the difference?
Dogger Land is the entire previous area of land under the North Sea. And if we reclaimed this would also involve substantially increasing the territorial area of France and Germany.
To be avoided. To be avoided. Although, of course, right, if we were the ones that reclaimed it, I think that the principle of finders keepers should really apply in this case.
I don't think Duncan came on this podcast to start a new major European war.
But it would be a European land war here rather than a naval conflict. But anyway, that's maybe for another conversation.
What we can agree is that we may need some heavy industry on that island quickly. But there are some interesting possibilities, are there not?
Well, yeah, and actually, I will pick up my previous question before I was corrected so kindly. That you've based your calculations here on it being just like London, haven't you?
Well, even lower productivity than that. Reading and Bracknell actually is about
and that will have a still. You said a 6.2,
6.4, yes.
6.4 cost benefit analysis.
Yes.
Right. Okay. But actually, it doesn't need to be like London, right? London has accreted over millennia, and there are probably quite a lot of problems. Well, we know there are plenty of problems with London. What do we imagine that this new city could look like, and how could it be better?
Yes. So there's quite a few things you could do here. One of the big ones is that London, of course, has extensive underground construction for its tube network. But it's also hideously expensive to add any additional line. Like the Elizabeth line cost 1% of UK GDP. Now, why is this so expensive? Well, because originally we would dig these things by digging a ditch on the surface and then filling it in and then placing a tube line underneath. The problem is that this is enormously disruptive when you're going through one of the busiest cities in the world. And so instead we have to dig underground at enormous cost, or layering on the fifth graft of stations which were never meant to be anything like this big, etc. And so instead, if you build everything in purpose intended for a much higher population from scratch, and you do it importantly on on an uninhabited green and pleasant land initially, where there's no city in the way, which prevents you from just digging ditches in straight lines to wherever you need to build your cut and cover rail lines, and it could be enormously cheaper. And you might even be able to make all roads underground, and instead of the surface entirely pedestrianised with vegetation to improve air quality, etc.
Okay, well, it's a relief to hear that the old maids of this new city will still be able to cycle. Although, again, this does sound frighteningly American? Are we imagining that this city will look something like a larger Milton Keynes?
Well, and we could also talk about the aesthetics, couldn't we? Because there's going to be no annoying local design codes to get in the way of the Georgian mansion blocks that will, I assume, be peppering the surface of this beautiful land.
Go on, Tom. You've clearly got lots to say here. You've been placed as mayor now of this new city, which we do need to give a name as well to.
Well, as mayor of, we've got to get rid of Dogger, haven't we?
Dogger is an unfortunate name.
New London.
New London. It has a certain ring to it.
Or New Powys.
It's the least we can do.
So, as mayor of New Powys, of course, I would have these Georgian mansion blocks. I would have a ton of high-speed rail lines, correcting what the mainland got wrong. I think lots of beautiful vegetation. I think car-free urban environments. Probably something clever to do with the sewage as well, Calum.
That's my favourite topic, Tom.
Like, one other notable thing is that you would potentially get a substantial benefit from agriculture here. Even if you only maintain current UK average productivity here, this would give you about 40 billion worth of farmland. And the Netherlands is the world's second largest food exporter, or sixth largest, depending on how you adjust it. It, despite only having 20 million people and being amongst the world's smallest countries, simply because of its very high land productivity on the reclaimed land.
And that point of 20 million does bring us to the topic of people, because as we've previously said, even if you moved even all of Clapham out, it might not be enough people to occupy this new country, this new land. So what could we potentially do, and what would be the benefits?
Yes, so I've done some additional modelling here of what if instead you adopted you had basically open borders, so anyone who wanted to move to this island was able to do so. I model a very restricted version of this, so I specifically assume that the marginal person in the world is currently indifferent towards coming to the UK, while in reality about 33 million people have it as their first choice for where they would migrate, and 800 million want to migrate generally, of which the vast majority is to English-speaking countries, and so you would expect many more to come if you did in fact implement this policy. But under this very conservative model, it turns out that the optimal number of people to maximize native welfare then depends on what you assume the percentage of GDP we should spend on public goods is. So this is things that are non-excludable and non-rival. So such tasks as protecting Britain from foreign invasion, and providing research to combat climate change, and planting the Union Jack on the moon. And so
all good stuff. All good stuff.
So, and what is this ratio? Because you talk about the need to balance this public works cost with the number of migrants.
Yes. So the reason is that the model I'm using is decreasing returns to scale. So it implies, probably incorrectly for the economy as a whole, that wages would decline, which I don't believe in general. But if you
bring in more people,
yes, this implies that this would be the case, in equilibrium, rather than just as a temporary response to capital. This is, I think, probably wrong for the economy as a whole, and indeed aggregate studies suggest that it probably is wrong. But if we assume for the moment that it's the case, then it turns out that the whether or not you want to choose the migration proposal over the closed borders proposal depends on what percentage of GDP you think we should spend on the public goods I mentioned earlier.
And that's things like aircraft carriers and
space program.
And
it's got to be a big chunk, right?
And debt interest, amongst other things.
And debt interest, yes.
So, and specifically, it's that the optimal number here is if it's the case that you have 5% of GDP or less spent on public goods, you would prefer the closed borders option. If you think it should be 7.5%, you're indifferent, and if you think it should be 10%, then you would, or more, then you would enthusiastically welcome.
But this is very. This feels like replicating the mistake, though, that Britain has made over the last 20, 30 years of bringing in people supposedly to subsidise us and to raise the quality of our workforce, but actually we've ended up paying a whole load of money to people who've not contributed.
Regardless of the state of migration over the past 20 or 30 years, I did note that there are enormous numbers of people who want to come to the UK, and so you can afford. And so, given that even under the London specification, I only imagine that 30 million people would move total. Under the Bracknell specification, I only assume more like 2 or 3 million would. And so you could be very, very selective about what migrants you admitted if that was something you were concerned with.
That slightly assuages my concern.
One other thing we'd like to know, Duncan, is the reaction that you've got from this paper that you've written. How have people responded to it?
So there's been a variety of responses, some of which have just treated it as a simple reductio ad absurdum argument against existing planning regulations. Others have offered alternative engineering specifications that the project could undertake. And there's been widespread skepticism about the ability of the UK government to deliver anything at the originally forecasted cost. Whilst I think I received one response along the lines of, I'd happily vote for this, but I'll eat my hat if you deliver it for that.
You're talking about manoeuvring, just to remind listeners, a large amount of whales into the North Sea. Is that going to cause sea displacement? Are the tides going to be rushing up the Hudson Bay into New York?
Well, the good news is that because Dogger Bank is so shallow and the oceans are so large, this is only actually going to cause a 1 millimeter rise in global sea levels everywhere else.
I mean, that sounds small, but do people not talk about 1 centimetre causing big surges and big increases?
I mean, climate change is currently scheduled to cause somewhere between 1 meters and 3 meters of sea level rise. So we are talking far less than a percentage point here, kind of thing.
Right. That seems doable.
And with those sea level rises induced by climate change, what will befall Dogger Bank, your realm, if the sea rises by 3 meters?
Well, the good news is that seawalls are generally very cheap. It's only 700 to 5,400 pounds per meter, and so it would only add less than 5% of the cost of the project to build a seawall around it. The other good news is that Dogger Bank is not, in fact, 40 meters flat, but I have given us 40 meters of rock to fill it in with, and so most of it will be much above.
That's very thoughtful.
Right, yeah, with rolling hills. The rolling hills.
The valleys.
Exactly.
The steep valleys.
They still carry the memory of what they once were. Well, I think we'll wrap up soon, Duncan. But before we do, what's your next project and what are you going to be working on now?
So I'm currently working on civilizational recovery. So suppose that 99% of the population dies and then the immediate force that's killed them is removed. What happens next? Does fertility go to zero? Do you quickly recover to your previous state? Do you reach a higher population than before? Or how does this affect humanity's long-term future? You're
going to be seeing out this disaster on Dogger Bank, surely.
Yes, this will be amongst the safest locations in the world, hopefully, provided that no one updates their nuclear targeting plans between.
as long as the Russians don't find out about it, it'll be totally safe.
And Duncan, finally, if people want to hear more about your work and perhaps even read this paper, where can they find you?
Yes, so I write at modelthinking.substack.com, and you can find my research on my website.
And we'll put that in the show notes.
Thank you very much, Duncan. This has been terrific, and thank you very much for joining us.
We will see you on Dogger Bank.
Goodbye.
Yes. Goodbye.